I will reject all attempts to weaken Canada, all attempts to wear us down, to break us down so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
He says he has his grievances with us. Well, we have our grievances with them. So why don't we sort them out without attacking each other's economies?
Universal public health care will never be on the negotiating table with New Democrats in Ottawa. We will never let that happen. Never. Never let that happen.
As you can hear and see there, U.S. President Donald Trump looms large over Canada's 45th federal election, and his shadow is set to stretch even further tomorrow, with Canada and much of the world the target of his so-called Liberation Day tariffs. How might this country respond? Here with some data on that question is CTV's Pollster, Nanos research founder, and chief data scientist Nik Nanos. Hey, Nick, good to see you.
Yep.
You asked some interesting questions of Canadians because there has been certainly, a lot of support for counter tariffs, but a little bit of division, it seems, amongst the premiers at least, on how much further we go. So do we put taxes, for example, on critical minerals, on potash, or the bigger question on oil and gas, so much of which we send to, like 98% of what we produce goes to the United States. Tell us a bit about what you found.
In the CTV Globe and Mail survey that we did, we asked Canadians about whether they supported or opposed putting exports on things like oil, gas, electricity, potash, and critical minerals. And the interesting thing is that it's clear that there's political license, at least to talk about these things. About 3 out of every 4 Canadians would support or somewhat support putting tariffs on exports of oil, gas, and natural gas, electricity, but also on critical minerals. So it speaks to a situation where there is political license to talk about this. Maybe that's the big signal for Donald Trump in the White House. If this comes up, the American White House has to be thinking there is license, at least politically, to talk about these things as a response to whatever the United States does.
Are there regional differences in the Canadians you polled? Because the premiers, for example, of the potash province in Saskatchewan and the oil and gas province in Alberta are not in favor of going.
Yeah, not to get too long. Yep. But I'll say a little more. Yes, if you happen to be in the prairies, the thing is that still about 67% of individuals that live in the prairies would support or somewhat support a tariff on exports, which is a significant number. But that is the lowest number. Think of that as the lowest number across the country. So you have to think of it. I always kind of think of it this way. We have to deal with the Trump administration without talking about, not saying that we will, but without talking about tariffs on the levers, these real important levers that we have. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Like, what, we're going to show up in the White House and go, yeah, we won't talk about energy tariffs, we won't talk about critical minerals. We'll just get crushed. So not saying that Canadians want to have tariffs, but at least there's license to think about it as a potential response.
So Danielle Smith was asked by one of our colleagues, the Alberta Premier, I got to get you on the record on how she characterized essentially this survey in particular. I'm going to play the clip for our audience, and then I'll get your response.
Okay.
I think it's a garbage poll, frankly, and you can let your bosses know that, because what if we were to ask Albertans or Canadians this? Would you support export tariffs if it meant the U.S. would retaliate by shutting off Line 5 and leaving Ontario and Quebec without gasoline or aviation fuel at all? I think you'd get a different answer.
So her caveat is essentially, why not add to, what the consequences of that are to the question that you pose?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I'd like to say I'm very flattered that she even knows who I am, because she is the Premier of Alberta. I'm not surprised. You know what? She has a job to do. She's advocating for her province. She's advocating for the energy sector. That's what she's supposed to do, and she's good at it. And I think it's very good for the Federation to have a premier at the table, or premiers at the table, to push the other premiers and the Prime Minister of the day on this. Now, this poll happens to be politically very inconvenient for her. But, I think you can rest assured that, she's doing what she believes is in the best interest of the country. But when we think of the strategy writ large, to take this off the table at the beginning, I think Canadians understand that's probably not a good strategy, and that it has to be part of the dialogue. Not saying, but this would, I think, for all intents and purposes, this would be a last resort.
Right. And everyone has kind of made that clear, even the people who say it should still be on the table. I just got about 30 seconds left.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you about the issue set, because now we're looking ahead to this so-called Liberation Day. A number of weeks ago, you had Trump polling even ahead of the economy. Is it still that way?
Absolutely, yeah. It's still Trump and U.S. relations, and who knows what will happen tomorrow in terms of ramping that up.
Stay tuned, 4 o'clock Eastern. Okay, Nick, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Nik Nanos is the founder and chief data scientist of Nanos Research, also our pollster of record, of course, here at CTV.